important top story tonight. The white nationalists who marched on Charlottesville, well, their allies say they're coming back to the White House this Sunday. The idea is marking the year since that alt-right rally, which of course resulted in the killing of a protester. Now today, Donald Trump was back attacking NFL players for protesting police brutality during the national anthem. And one of his biggest defenders on Fox News, Laura Ingraham, under fire what she views as, quote, demographic changes.
Because in some parts of the country, it does seem like the America that we know and love doesn't exist anymore. Massive demographic changes have been foisted upon the American people. And they're changes that none of us ever voted for and most of us don't like. Now, much of this is related to both illegal and, in some cases, legal immigration that, of course, progressives love.
Laura Ingraham now says those comments, quote, had nothing to do with race. Meanwhile, we can report that across the nation, there is a surge in candidates associated with white nationalism.
I consider myself a white racialist.
He's also campaigning to keep Chicago's neighborhoods 90% white.
I think most white people want a white neighborhood.
This monstrous nature of the Jewish people must be known to the public.
It's not because we're racist, it's because we feel marginalized and we're the ones who are being oppressed.
We turn now to prominent civil rights leaders in the new generation. DeRay McKesson from Black Lives Matter and Patrisse Cullors, a co-founder of Black Lives Matter. She's also the author of When They Call You a Terrorist. Thank you both. DeRay, let's start with the point. This is an anniversary of a thing and a killing that was brought about by the white nationalists. How as a society do we address that and turn it into something potentially more constructive?
Yeah, so this is a racist rally, and we should name it as such. I'm less interested actually in the rally and more interested in how this rally functions. You know, just today, one of the leaders of the rally was actually on NPR, and he espoused a belief that was just scientific racism, and we continue to give platforms to that, and we shouldn't do that anymore. I'm also mindful, too, of the way that this solidifies a set of beliefs for a base of the Republican Party that benefits from this. So you see Laura Ingraham say things that are really about making sure the country is as white as possible. And the reality is that white people are the minority, or they're becoming the minority really quickly, and you see this wing of the party fighting against that at every step of the way. Trump didn't even condemn the last year, and Sessions did call the act evil. He said that he would investigate it, but you and I haven't heard anything about the fruit of that investigation, and here we are 1 year later.
I think that's well put. Patrisse, on that very point, I want to play the mother of the woman who was killed at that rally speaking out. Take a look.
I can tell you what David Duke and Richard Spencer and Jason Kessler and I believe Matthew Heimbach have even said, and that is that the current administration has given them the go-ahead, given them a thumbs up, given them a wink and a nod. That's their words, not mine.
That is potent coming from a mother who lost her child there last year. How does that fit into this, the, quote, political accountability for what may be separate acts of violence?
I mean, what we've seen since Donald Trump was on the campaign trail is extreme white supremacy, an affinity towards white nationalism. He's allowed for people, and white people in particular, to talk terribly about black people, about Muslims. And so when that young person was killed by the protester, while it was shocking and disturbing, we knew that Donald Trump created the environment for that to happen.
And so, DeRay, what is the activism that turns this, or is this by necessity, I guess, defensive activism? In other words, you both are involved in an organization that had a wide impact and had a grassroots support, and Black Lives Matter is a term that I think is, we've discussed, is known all over the world. But talking about fighting white nationalists at a grassroots level, if you will, is quite different from the work you were doing a few years ago before the Trump era or police brutality.
Yeah, I think some of it is being mindful that we can't give platforms that normalize this sort of language and these ideas. You know, my challenge to you and all the media is about how we cover this, is that your shows across the country aren't having any of the people who went in and killed a journalist. You're not having people on who said that the media is like terrible people who we should hate. Why? Because you know that that actually leads to bad things. You know that that speech is harmful. It's the same with these guys, is that they come out and they espouse these things that they say really nicely, like they deliver it nicely, but the fruit of it is just bad. The second is that people have been organizing, will continue to organize. This won't stop any of that. But what this does do is like it allows this language to enter into the civic space in a way that we need to make sure it doesn't. You know, like I know, part of free speech is not speech that incites violence. And I don't know any better example of speech that incites violence than Charlottesville in the recent memory. I don't even know why they're back in Charlottesville, why they're allowed back.
So on that point, build on the media critique you're making. You're saying specifically what should the media or the television media try to avoid?
Yeah, so I think, one, if there's a platform, we should use the actual words and phrases that they say and stop paraphrasing it. The second is that we should also, hosts should be able to challenge them on the facts. So today on NPR, Kessler literally espouses scientific racism, and the host just sort of lets him talk. And it's like, that is just wrong. It is not that black people have lower IQs than other races. Like, that is what he said. And the host just sort of is like, oh, that's interesting. Why do you think that? It's like, no, not why do you think that? It should be, that just isn't true. And we can't let people espouse these things and put them into the public conversation, because it feeds a set of behaviors and actions that we know are dangerous. And again, the media is not having on people who think the media should be shot and killed or that the media is destroying the world. You're not validating those set of opinions because you know it's wrong.
Patrice?
Well, I just want to make sure that I call out folks on the ground that are going to be, dealing with the white supremacists in D.C. Our local chapter, the Black Lives Matter Global Network, local chapter Black Lives Matter D.C. is going to be doing a series of events this weekend to both hold space for people who are going to be, protesting against these white supremacists, but also making sure that people are safe. We don't know what's going to happen this weekend, and we need people on the ground, and our chapter is going to be making sure that folks are safe on the ground.
I think you guys have made several important points. The last one, Patrice, is important, which is we are on the precipice of another period here just this weekend where there is a credible higher risk of hate crimes and race-based violence, which is part of how we cover it and then try to do that thoughtfully without exacerbating it. And both of you offering, I think, food for thought for our viewers and ourselves here in the newsroom about how to do better. DeRay McKesson and Patrisse Cullors, thank you both. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.